I was writing notes when you were talking, Paul, and the one line that I took away, keep the legs moving and good things happen. And just an incredible story. And I think you are a real role model for the quote that passion can take you places. It's literally taken you places. So thank you for being here. It's truly a privilege to have this conversation. And Anurag and I were talking. Anurag knows I read a book a week. For the last many years, I've been trying to read 50 a year. And I read this book over the weekend and then read it again Monday morning before talking to you. And I was reflecting on this, Paul, and the question in my mind was, why do I read so many books? Why do I read? And several of you are readers. That's the reason you're in the room. And I was thinking, why do I read so much? And I came up with two answers. The first is books are mirrors. I look into books. I gaze into books to try and make sense of my life, because a lot of times my life doesn't make sense. Or books can be windows. And maybe subconsciously, I believe that the answers to my desires, my achievements, my failings, my issues lie somewhere in stories spun by strangers. And the reason I loved your book, Paul, so much, and the reason I read it twice over the weekend and again Monday morning, was this is both a mirror and a window. And as I was reading the book, The 5 E's, I really thought about what am I doing well and where am I lacking. And for example, you and I had a conversation, right? I think coming up with a vision is relatively easier for me, but exciting thousands of people, and we'll talk about that, is not something that comes easily. So it was a mirror, and then I walked away with a lot of insights as well. So once again, thank you. Truly a privilege to be here.
Thank you for reading the book twice in a short period of time.
I'd highly recommend this book, folks, if you haven't read it. So you and I have agreed we'll do a bit of a salsa between your personal story and the leadership story. And I'm really curious about both. Let me start with the personal side, Paul. In the book, you talk about a pattern of risks that you've taken, a habit of stepping out of your comfort zone on a regular cadence. And there's a line in the book that really touched me. You say, what I lacked in preparation, I made up with intense curiosity and desire to explore the world. And I've seen this over and over again in leaders that I admire. They have a pattern of taking risks. In Amazon, we call this being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And you have this pattern as well. So tell us more. Is it really essential to leadership?
Well, first of all, I'm a strange animal in Windsor, Ontario. People in Windsor, Ontario stay. My brother is a police officer. My younger brother is a firefighter. My dad was a teacher. And I was the one in the entire family that left. And I'm still not sure why, because it was a wonderful place, wonderful home, and so on. But I had the curiosity. And I think that's something that it's really important. The exceptional leaders that I've met, you don't have to travel off to the other side of the world. But pursuing curiosity is a critical core element of every exceptional leader that I've ever met. That phrase, when in doubt, just go. Well, the famous phrase that Wayne Gretzky, let's call him the Sachin Tendulkar of ice hockey, he said this, right? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Take the shot. So that always resonated deeply with me. And I think probably back to hockey, it's there. That idea of what's around the corner, I think that's an important quality of a leader, that desire to pursue, to find out what's around the corner. That leads to what I believe is visionary leadership.
Fantastic. What about fears? Does any of this ever scare you?
Oh, man. When I got the tap to go to India, I was in Tokyo living the life. I had a great role. I was a managing director. And my boss in Amsterdam said, things are going well for you, eh, Paul? I said, yeah, thank you, Robert Jan. He said, good, it's time for a change. Moment of truth. Counterintuitive, right? And for a moment I said, huh? And then I said, you're right. Split second, you're right. This is exactly what I'm preaching as a leader. And you are absolutely right. But what I didn't know was what he was going to say next. He said, so, okay, how about India? And I said, hang on, got to call my wife. And my wife's from Japan. And let me tell you, of all the countries I've traveled in and worked around and so on, India, Japan. They're at far ends of the continuum in so many ways. And I say that in a positive way. I absolutely love India and I love Japan. What an incredible combination. And so coming to India was scary. Absolutely. And I came alone in the beginning because I knew it would be intense. You heard the story. There was much more to the story. Randstad, India was in big trouble in many ways. And I was sent over to rescue this massive ship in a very diverse country of culture and languages and so on, and gray zones and Jugaad. And so, yeah, I was afraid. But I'll tell you what, that fear motivated me. And I don't think it's just about me, Puneet. I think exceptional leaders that I'm around. I look around this room, I met so many amazing people. I think there's a common denominator amongst exceptional leaders. They get motivated by that fear. That fear becomes adrenaline. That fear becomes curiosity. That fear becomes the motivation to try, to take that shot, and to always bounce back. So yeah, I think fear is a good thing.
Love that, love that. And when you're at my age, when roughly I think several of us in the room are, you're either in a midlife crisis or you've come out of one or you're getting into one, you reflect on this, and I was reflecting on my own life, and some of the biggest regrets I have in life are the shots that I didn't take, Paul. And I had the shot in front of me. It could be personal shots, it could be professional shots, and that's what I regret most. And so I couldn't agree more with, if there's a shot ahead of you, just take it. Let's talk about your book a little bit, Paul. It's all about game-changing leadership. In the end, you say that game-changing leadership is the sum of the 5 E's. In fact, it's also a multiplication of the 5 E's. But my question to you is, out of the 5 E's, which one is the one which has the most disproportionate impact on leadership, and which one's the toughest to master?
Fantastic question. As a former McKinsey guy, makes sense, right?
Hold that
Makes
against
sense.
me, but yes.
Logic, scientific, good. And I like the question. And I think I'll give you maybe a wishy-washy answer. All the E's are important. But now let me tell you how I really feel. I think if you start off with a vision that is rooted in the what, it will crash and burn. How many leaders have you worked with in your career, for them, that said, we are going to be the biggest in our industry? That's not a compelling why. That is not a vision. That is output. That is the result of a compelling vision. By the way, we become the biggest. But it should be about the why. Why are we going to do this? What's the purpose? That, to me, is what gets the exceptional leaders out of bed. And that's what creates movements. So vision absolutely is the most important. And I think a lot of leaders struggle with that. The leaders who I've met, who I've interviewed a lot, this may be a strange way to say it, but I'll say it. The smart people often think of themselves as being very good at creating visions, but their visions are algorithms, and they're often 15 slides in a PowerPoint deck. That's not a vision. A vision should be summarized in one breath, and it should touch your heart and your mind, just like that. So it really begins with something special that really people want to be part of. So vision is so important. But if you ask me where I'm at now, what's more important for me right now, enable, the 4th E. Becoming that leader at this stage in my journey where I help others become independent. I help them build those muscles. Again, I said earlier, don't pick up the hammer. I let them experiment with that hammer. And I stand back and avoid the urge to pick up the hammer and let them try.
Got it. I'm going to take you back. You touched on the first E. You've touched on the 4th E. I'm going to take you to E number 3. And so, folks, for those of you who haven't read the book, the 5 E's: envision, express, excite, enable, and execute. But you said envision is the one which has the most disproportionate impact. I agree with you. So let's assume as a leader, you've come up with a big, bold, hairy, ambitious vision. You've expressed it well. You've articulated it well in a breath. It touches the hearts and minds. What I struggle with typically, and I think you said this in your presentation as well, excite is where the moment of truth is. And you run organizations with thousands of people, several of us do. How do you really ignite the light? How do you really get thousands of people excited and marching onto the same tune and go after that vision?
Well, the simple answer, it's tough. It's very tough. In India, 75 offices, 2,000 core employees, 65,000 contractors, temps. How do you capture the hearts and minds of everybody? And then on top of that, this thing called COVID. Yeah, it's very challenging. I think we have to accept one thing as leaders. We are not the savior. We are there to ignite fires, to create movements, to identify those motivational buttons of the people we speak to. And I think that's the first thing we need to learn. And my dad used to say this. It was like a riddle, and I never understood him when I was a kid. Now I get it. Son, 2 ears, 1 mouth, he used to say. 2 ears, 1 mouth. And I thought, Dad, well, what do you mean? And now I get it. Listen more than you speak. And the exceptional leaders that I've been around create excitement by actually genuinely listening to people. In the process of listening, what you discover is that everyone has different motivations. Once you identify the motivations, then you start to push those buttons that trigger the reaction. If I talk to my risk and audit team and I talk about making money, I'm going to put them asleep, or maybe they'll actually be afraid. If I talk to my salespeople about making money and making it, they get excited. They want to go. If I talk to my risk and audit team about protect and enable, honor our values while we protect and enable, then they get excited. So it's really important to understand the audience you're speaking to. But again, the compelling why, your vision should touch everybody in the room. But we have to accept the fact that there will be some people in the room that will have a question mark over their head. There will always be those, let's call them maybe detractors or at least neutral. And you have promoters. The key is to leverage your promoters and create a movement to infect the rest of the organization. And I think anyone who's read Good to Great knows the analogy of the bus. There are tough moments, Puneet, when we have to make a decision, when people don't connect with the vision and they're not passionate about it, they're not living it, they're not bringing it to life. Maybe they need to get off the bus.
Really interesting. The other thing in the book, Paul, that I took away is this often heard debate about, is leadership a science or an art? And again, I'm going to quote you to you, which is interesting. Leadership is a perfect combination of science and art, but truly remarkable leaders will be remembered not for the science, but for the art. Tell us more.
I wonder how many people in here agree with that. I know Shiv agrees, Yeah, I don't know if Shiv's still around, but he wrote a book, The Art of Management. Yeah, art. Art of work? Art absolutely trumps science in my book. Anybody who did an MBA in the 80s, you probably studied management science. Remember that? Come on. Management is not a science. You're dealing with human beings. If you're managing processes, supply chain, quality assurance, okay, that might be a science. But when you're talking about people, this is not about science. It's all about art. I think there are certain things you could say with full conviction, 100% accuracy, that if you do this, this will happen. Absolutely, that's science. But most of what we do as leaders is actually art. It's about creativity. It's about agility. It's about sensitivity. So yeah, I think there is a balance between the two, but I don't think it's equal. I probably even should rewrite that quote. I think it's an important combination of the two. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, yeah. But there are moments when there's science. For example, when I go after today's meeting, I believe I have to go to my hotel and do a business review on Japan's financial 2022 results. Science. The P&L is the P&L. There's science there. There's science, yeah.
I think another interesting story at Amazon, this whole thing around leadership, right? Which is, so we look at it, we're a very data-driven company, so we look at data, we've got metrics for everything you can imagine. So like you, I do reviews and I go into the nth level of detail on data, but sometimes more than data, it's customer anecdotes that are even more important. Because I would see metrics and I call them watermelon metrics, which is the metrics are green, but the customer doesn't seem really happy. It's a watermelon metric. And that's when you go and look for customer anecdotes, saying, listen, can we have a conversation? Tell me what the customer is saying. What are the pain points? And that's where it becomes art. It's not really science. There's no algorithm to tell you it's good, bad, or ugly. And that's where judgment comes in as a leader as well.
I absolutely agree. And here's an interesting thing. Let's say a bold experiment that I launched in India, which has now become the core of who I am as a leader. Typically in business reviews, anyone who does a business review, when you sit down on the business review with your team, what's the first thing that comes on the slide? Numbers. It's a business review, right? So I made a decision that, especially with COVID and the challenges we are facing, and not to mention before COVID, India was in big trouble, Randstad India. If we talked about the numbers at the beginning of every meeting, it would be very dark and gloomy. So I decided to move the numbers to the very end of every meeting. We made a rule. Regardless of the review we were doing, numbers go to the end. We started with the most important thing. People. Let's talk about people. So when I sat down with my leaders one-on-one, I said, let's talk about your people. Let's talk about your team. How's your team doing? Who's doing well on your team? Who's shining? Why? What is he or she doing? Who's struggling? What are you doing to help enable that person? Who needs to get off the bus? Let's make decisions. Let's take action. We started every meeting with people. Imagine the finance team. My CFO really struggled with that one, let me tell you. But we started every conversation with people. Now, if you have the people right and you create an environment where everybody can shine and the story lines up, by the time we get to the numbers, they should be good, right? If the algorithm is right. So there's maybe a bit of science. So I brought that to Japan. Very alien for Japan. Again, a lot of pushback when I moved back to Japan in 2021. But now, if you go into Randstad Japan, we've created a culture of we start every conversation with people. And I absolutely believe in this algorithm. Gather great people together, create an environment where they can grow and be the best true version of themselves and use and shine and use their natural brilliance. and the results will follow. We're proving it. By the way, and I can tell you now, I haven't done the review this afternoon yet, but there'll be some high fives because Randstad Japan just had the best year in the history of 25 years in Japan in 2022.
Fantastic.
Thanks to a lot of lessons learned right here in incredible India, so thank you.
I'm again very curious about your learnings, Paul, and especially I'm not an expert in Japanese culture, but at least in India, it's hard to get people to tell you the bad news. There are lots of high fives, lots of positive stories, but it's not a natural muscle for people to be vocally self-critical and talk about things where we messed up. Have you seen that? If yes, how do you encourage your teams to come and tell you the truth?
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like you're talking to the guilty guy. Huh? I was like that for a very long time until I'd say the past few years. You know, at one point, as I said earlier, leaders I don't think leaders are gurus. There was a generation where leaders were gurus. Probably, let's say us. I put myself in the category 55 in a few weeks. Hey, Anurag, you and I in the same generation. I think we went through a stage where we thought, huh? Oh, okay. Well, we're still in the same. We listened to 1980s music, Anurag.
Anurag's trying to disassociate with you and saying, I'm not in the same range.
That's why he looks so much younger than me. But, we went through a stage, I think all of us, where we thought leader should be a guru. The leader is the one who knows. But I think there was a moment for me where I realized, actually, that's not the role of the leader. Nowadays, knowledge is at your fingertips. If my kids want to have information, they don't come to me to ask. They go to Google. Google gives them the answer instantly, better than I can provide, right? So we're not the guru anymore. I think our role now really is about the fourth E. Moving forward in this new world, and the new world of work too, leader as enabler. I really believe that's the key. That's the muscle we need to all build moving forward.
Damn cool. The most interesting story that I came across in the book, Paul, is your martial arts story where one of your gurus at that time or whatever, right? Somebody walked up to you and said, which is your weaker leg and which is your stronger leg. And your weaker leg will not take you to the 10th fight, work on your stronger one. And that was counterintuitive because, again, the conventional wisdom is think about your weaknesses, constantly get feedback on that, work on them. But what you said was work on your strengths, they'll carry you further along. Tell us more.
Yeah, you're taking me back to 1992, I guess it was, in a little backstreet dojo in Osaka, Japan. And I was training for the Japan national tournament. And I was practicing martial arts, the roundhouse kick, right? I was practicing the roundhouse kick with my left leg. And in Japan, the sensei, the teachers, are usually teachers of little words. Huh? A lot of watching, a lot of deep breathing. And when a comment is made, it usually means that you're doing something wrong. Okay, so no news is good news. So my sensei came next to me. I could feel his laser beam, looking at me from the side. I kept practicing my kick, and he said, "Stop, yame." And he asked me, "Which leg is stronger?" And I said, "Oh, my right." So why are you practicing your left? And it was like a hallelujah moment. And I'll never forget that. There's such a deeper meaning there. Why focus on our weaknesses? Focus on your strengths. So I changed. And by the way, I will tell you, I ended up getting the silver medal. And I won with a right kick the final match because I focused on my strengths. So there's analogy here about our strengths. And when we're leading as well, I think it's very important to identify the strengths. Don't focus on the weaknesses of the team members. Identify their strengths and help them to be the best in the world using that strength.
Yeah. You and I spoke about this earlier, right? Which is when I'm hiring people, I usually look for what we call a spike, right? There's something that is about you that stands out, right? And it doesn't have to be degrees and experience and blah, blah, blah. It could be martial arts for all that you care about. It could be ice hockey. It's something that you're truly passionate about, something that's truly spiky about, where you truly are distinctive. And that is a really interesting ingredient for trying to catch leadership very early in people.
Agreed. We actually hired somebody recently. Interesting question. We do ask that question. What makes you passionate? What gets you excited? Outside of work. You got to clarify that, right? Outside of work. And a young fellow in Japan, this will connect with you here in India. He's on a mission to eat curry, Japanese curry, if you've ever had it. It's very sweet, right? Japanese curry at every curry restaurant in Japan. So he's traveling around, he's chronicling it all. He takes photos, he ranks it, and so on. He's building this, he's going to write a book eventually. And he's so passionate. When he started talking about it, I thought he was going to jump off his seat into my lap. I mean, he was so excited about this topic. And as you said, passionate about something, anything. And that was his passion. We hired him, and he's doing great.
Last professional question, and then I'll go to one last personal question. You've got a really interesting vantage point, Paul, because you've been in India, which is obviously, we do a lot of things well, and we also are known for our Jugaad. And you've been, obviously, spent a lot of time in Japan, which is known for its structure, hierarchy, processes, Kaizen, some of the things we spoke about. Have you seen examples or stories of both Jugaad and Kaizen coming together?
Well, I would say that's my mission now. I'm probably going to say for maybe the rest of my life. I've become an ambassador of Jugaad in Japan. I was an ambassador of Kaizen in India. That combination is magical, magical. You know, the spirit of Jugaad, which in my view, and I know it's controversial, right? It's debatable, but my view of Jugaad is the spirit of making it work somehow. Creativity, ingenuity, using these limited resources to just kind of figure it out. It's a brainstorming cycle that happens. It's magical. I've seen it with my teams in India. And then you have Kaizen on the other side, where it's about meticulous planning, focus on quality. 99% is not good enough. It must be perfect. And it takes time to get there. But once you get there, the Japanese will execute to perfection. Just imagine if you could blend those two. Incredible, so powerful. And by the way, I believe there's one country in the world that can do it. It's India. This is the rising country in the world. This is the growing, well, we know it's going to be the largest population, but young, energetic, eager, entrepreneurial, the largest democracy, et cetera, et cetera. There's so much great stuff here happening. I encourage you all to wave both the Jugaad and the Kaizen flag in everything you do.
Damn cool. One of my favorite quotes, Paul, on India is by a guy called Ruchir Sharma. Anurag, you should get him if you haven't. He's there. His new book is out. And one of his quotes on India, Paul, is that India is a country that has consistently disappointed both the pessimist and the optimist. And it is so beautifully articulated. But what's now changing is that we're only disappointing the pessimist. India is changing now. Last question, and one of the reasons, Paul, I was so curious to come and see you is this philosophy of do well and do good. And I love that about you and what you're doing. And tomorrow, as you said, you're headed to Ladakh for your annual ritual with your son, Kengo. Tell us more about what you're doing there and why do you do it?
Well, thank you. It was, I guess, 2017 fall. I got a call from the Mumbai High Commission, Canadian High Commission. I was in Bangor, sitting on my balcony in beautiful Bangor, the wonderful weather there. And I got a call saying, hey, Paul, we're going to have an Indo-Canada friendly ice hockey tournament in Ladakh. Would you like to join? I said, whoa, I never heard of Ladakh. And I took my iPad and looked up Ladakh, and I saw this place, and I started to look at photos, and I thought, wow, this looks amazing. I'm going. So I went, and I fell in love with Ladakh. Since I've been going every year. 2 years ago was the last time because of COVID. We went with a contingent, and in fact, this fella is a legendary ice hockey player. His name is Slava Fetisov, Russian, former Minister of Sport for Russia, captain of the Russian national team, two-time Olympic gold winner, Stanley Cup winner with the Detroit Red Wings, my team. I was a fan of this guy. He joined me on this trip because he's the United Nations ambassador for climate change. So this whole thing around hockey has become much bigger. I've then partnered with someone who's become my good friend, Sonam Wanchuk at SICMOL. I'll be spending the day with him on Friday and his students. And we're now raising awareness of climate change using hockey as the vehicle. So it's not about just sport, huh? It's about the bigger issue. So there's so much more to do. But of course, we're bringing 150 kilograms of skates. Thanks to the Japanese ice hockey community, I've got a huge pile of skates that we're going to truck out to the remote villages. We'll go to that Chuchot lake I showed you. We'll go to some of the remote lakes and we'll bring it out to the villages. We'll put kids on ice and let them experience the joy of what I think is the coolest sport on earth.
Fantastic. You're truly not a leader till the time you're paying it forward, and you are. So thank you for that, Paul. I think we've got a minute left, folks. Any questions from the audience? Do we have mics? The gentleman here.
Paul, you had a wonderful, interesting journey all throughout, and fascinating, PowerPoint presentation that you'd made. Talks a lot about the struggles that you had to go through. Whenever you face challenges throughout your life, whether it was as a kid or whether it was, getting from number 38 to number 1. What is that one thing? Of course, Envision was at the top of it, I'm sure. But what was that one thing that made you feel that you will get there?
Oh, wow, good question, Manpreet. I'd say, first of all, I hate to lose. I think that's a quality that many exceptional leaders that have been around have. It's a stubbornness. We don't like to lose. I get motivated when we're losing the game. That's when I try harder. That's one. I think there's a lot of mantras that guide us. You're not going to change the world overnight. So I have a few phrases. One is, take everything seriously, take nothing personally. That one helped me out a lot in India. Yeah,
well answered.
Take everything seriously, take nothing personally. Yeah.
Question to the back. Folks, we'll make it the last question. It's time's up.
My question is to both of you. Both are leaders in your own right. How do you deal with the shadow of the leadership? Organizations usually become the reflection of the leadership. How do you deal with that?
Go first. That's an interesting question, and one of my mentors once told me that, Puneet, as a leader, you have a big shadow and you don't realize that. Because the way
We become the banyan trees sometimes.
You become the banyan tree because every meeting, every handshake, every conversation, every review, if you don't show up with your full energy and force and enthusiasm and optimism, it'll rub off on the team. And by the way, it also has a downside because your teams will start behaving like you behave. And if you've got bad things, they'll get amplified much more, right? So I think the only thing I try and do is self-reflection, which is try and be as conscious of how I show up. I genuinely believe energy and enthusiasm is worth 25 IQ points. And if you show up with energy and enthusiasm in every meeting, every shaking of hand, every email, every conversation, it will rub off. So just the more you can reflect and the more conscious you can become of how you show up, the slightly better it becomes.
I like that. I'll take the sports analogy again. I look at Sachin Tendulkar and P.T. Ushka, the badminton player. P.T. Ushka, is it?
Ushka is the racer, the runner.
Oh, sorry. Okay, right. P.T. Ushka, the racer. And then the woman, the badminton player as well.
P.V. Sindhu.
So, yeah, right. P.V. Sindhu, yeah. And of course, Wayne Gretzky. And anyone who's had a long career, an illustrious career, who performed at a high level in anything, sport, business, arts, keep going. Look at Mick Jagger. I mean, you can line these people up and say, what is the common denominator? The common denominator is healthy cadence and discipline, consistency. I don't want to work for a leader who's like this. Huh? We've all had those leaders. Oh, don't talk to him today. He's in a bad mood. I don't want to be that leader. Find your sweet spot, your healthy cadence, and protect that at all costs. Part of that then is take care of yourself. And I just had a great conversation with a lady here who wrote a book on the topic. Rachna, yeah. And COVID taught us the importance of wellness, and wellness is not only physical. Huh? It's not only what we put in our body, it's what we put in here and here. We have to take care of both as leaders. So important to find that sweet spot. Sachin Tendulkar had slumps, but he never let himself get too low. And when he was high, he never let himself get too high. That's what a champion does. And I think that's the same with exceptional leaders.
Super.
Well, the Japanese version of my book is coming out in the fall. That's very exciting. And I'm working on my second and third book right now, probably next year, yeah.
Fantastic.
And there's a lot of India in the book, let me tell you. Yeah?
Awesome. The last line in your book, Paul, is again where I'm going to end this conversation. You say, let's change the game together. So folks, pay it forward, do good, be good, and your passion can truly take you places. Paul, once again, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Puneet. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you very much.